He's the former president and publisher of the Sun Herald, and now he's on the radio. Welcome to Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi a great place to live, work, and play. Today, we're going to have a diversion from the coronavirus. We've talked a lot about what we're going to be dedicating this show to, and we're going to continue to look at what is the impact on schools, on churches, on the medical industry, on, the economy. We're going to continue to talk to people about that. But every now and then we need a little bit of a diversion. And like we did with Dorothy Roberts looking back on her parents, and like we did with Dean and Tim Holloman looking back at Boyce Holloman, like we did with Bobby Mahoney looking back at Mary Mahoney's, we're going to have another one of those conversations today. My guest today is none other than our sweet friend, Elaine Stevens. She's actually a former media person. We used to sort of work across the street from one another. She's a veteran of media. She's done a lot of things, actually, as it relates to media. And she's also an author. She's written, co-authored a couple of books, and she's about to finish a third book. And we'll be talking about that book as we go through this. But we're actually going to spend today looking back at Gus Stevens, the restaurant. It was more than a restaurant, actually, as you'll learn. If you didn't know what Gus Stevens is, you'll enjoy this conversation. But Elaine, isn't it amazing that Gus Stevens is such a part of the conversation even today?
It really is. And, up until the time my mom passed away a couple of years ago, she said that little Greek man, that short little Greek man that was the most unorthodox man of all in business and otherwise, was able to establish a brand. Well, he didn't even know what a brand was,
Right.
He barely could speak the language. He always spoke with an accent. He just had a vision for this coast. He was passionate about the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
So for people who don't know, it was at the corner of Veteran and Beach Boulevard. It was there for many years. We'll get into the time frame here shortly. It became, unfortunately, after it closed, a Mexican restaurant.
And other things.
It eventually was sort of wiped away, and
right.
life goes on. But it really left such I think it got seared in the memory of so many people, because it was during the 60s especially, it was the place to go. I mean, just to give the listeners an opportunity to hear the kind of people who went there, just give some names, throw some names out there.
Well, we always wanted to go as children to see the floor shows, because Daddy featured people like Bobby Darin, Mel Torme, Gene Austin, Rudy Valley, Jerry Lee Lewis. Elvis came through there, but Daddy told him he'd never make it because he shakes too much. So there was just a whole variety of people. Of course, Gene Moore's group, the Four Men, started there, and Mother and Daddy always gave credit to Gus Stevens for the birth of Brett.
And Gene, good. And Gene actually sung at your mother's funeral.
Yeah, yes, he did.
What a wonderful connection.
We're really close with that family.
Yeah, I am too. I love them so much.
I love them.
And then, of course, I think the one thing that people always remember, just worldwide they remember, is that Jayne Mansfield situation. So it was the last place she went before she left in the car and had her now, unfortunate wreck that she was killed in. She
performed with us in 1963 and then came back in 1967, which was the year of her death. And along with her, the driver in the car was my fiance. So my book, which I'm writing, sort of centers around that life and the build up to the life, because the life before the accident was quite fantastical from the standpoint of fantasy and glamour.
Yeah.
And then there was a turnaround completely, my life completely changed. So, but Jayne, yes, was a very popular performer here on the coast. People loved her. Daddy and she got along great. We took her on our yacht at the Blue Dolphin. I played with her children. I babysat them. Mariska came along later, the one that is on Special Victims Unit. She was actually in the car the night of that accident in 1967. There's just a tremendous amount of history and interwoven kinds of incidents that have tied our family with the Mansfield family, even through the years.
One of the things that it's been good for me to sort of reconnect. I've often said on the show that we're moving too fast in our lives.
Yes,
we don't take the chance to really get to know someone really well. And that way, Coast Vue for me has been a gift. It's been an opportunity to really zero in on one person for an extended period of time and learn things about them. I never had an opportunity to know because I was moving too fast. But in preparation for my conversation with Terry Green and Rick Carter,
yes,
it was such a fascinating conversation. But I wanted to kind of get up to speed on the history of gaming, because they played obviously a huge role. The Pride of Mississippi and the efforts that they had around that really were very important to the overall discussion around dockside gaming as we came to know it. And then, of course, I had a great conversation with Gerald Blessey about that subject and his determination to bring the Europa into Biloxi and how that contributed to this discussion as well. You couldn't help, in preparation for either one of those conversations, to go back in time to see, as you said before the discussion, at the turn of the century, there was gambling here, and it was literally used to energize the economy. And the Broadwater was the reason Broadwater came to be, and there were games of chance at Gus Stevens.
There were. In fact, one of my birthday parties, we covered the blackjack table, and had a kindergarten party. I had a kindergarten party and my first grade birthday party there, and we're covering this felt table, this blackjack table, and having Coca-Colas and sandwiches in the back room, because back then it was illegal, obviously. But Daddy always said gambling plus good food, a little liquor, and some hot women, that's a way to make some money. And, that was the draw.
So what we had was, historically, we had several things that were happening. Prohibition was happening. Right. You had Keesler Air Force Base had an issue with the gambling and what was happening.
Correct.
And so there was a lot of energy in the 60s, later 60s especially, to shut it down. Obviously, those efforts actually started even before the 60s. But when we got to 1969, Hurricane Camille hits, and for all practical purposes, gaming as we knew it prior to then was kind of wiped off the face of it. It did come back in pockets, but it was a lot more seedy.
It was behind closed doors. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, those are all kind of part of history. It's always interesting to kind of set it up. It closed in what year?
Daddy's place closed in 1975.
The year I graduated from high school.
Yeah, things were changing with Camille and a lot of different things. The business was changing. The industry itself, hospitality, was changing. Daddy was a throwback to the era, when stage performers came into town and things were different.
Yeah, what was so cool to go back in time and look at that. Your mother actually was a central figure in this, and we'll get into that in the second segment, but found it interesting. Your dad actually built a cage for her to be in.
He did. How did you know that, Ricky?
Because I did my homework.
That's a chapter in the book. It's called The Bird Cage.
But she really was kind of the force to keep things stable around there, and she was so important to the overall discussion. So when we talk about Gus Stevens, while it is a man, it's actually an entity.
It is an entity.
It's a family, and all the people that surrounded that family lived an amazing life for a period of time.
And we felt like we lived in that restaurant, We, in fact, in my book, the first chapter is called The Fourth Sibling, because there's three of us in the family, and the restaurant played a significant role in the family. It came first. But Mother was a tremendous part of it. I mean, without her foresight and patience and understanding of this little Greek who was always on the go, you think you move fast, you should have seen Gus. I mean, he needed roller skates. Everybody needed roller skates to keep up with him.
Yeah.
But she did a lot. She was the glamour behind the business, and she was sort of the thread of the sexuality and sensuality that ran through it, which is the metaphor for the book itself. So oddly enough, my mother, as I started writing, I realized her role was greater than I thought it would be.
Tell the name of the book.
The name of the book is Mermaid in the Window, and for those of you who knew Gus Stevens, there was a mermaid in the window who was somewhat of a shocking thing, even though in the Bible Belt we didn't get that many sort of not that much opposition to it. She was a very alluring and demure type of mermaid, and she had a moat around her. So that was sort of the metaphor for a beautiful woman but stay away kind of thing. And Daddy, of course, had exotic dancers, and in those days men did not throw money on the stage. That was not done then. It was strictly more like a burlesque. It was very classy. Yeah. So the mermaid runs through a lot of the theme. And Mother carried that through in teaching us about glamour and beauty and being feminine, that whole Southern quality too. And then, of course, we had the Greek thing coming in there too.
It kind of reminds me of Mary Mahoney in some ways, because she was very much like that.
Very vibrant. And all the people that you mentioned at the top of the show, all of us became very close. And Gus collaborated with the Buena Vista, and the Buena Vista collaborated with Mahoney's, and it was a family, and people realized there was a growth that was possible on this coast if we worked together, and that's what they did.
Yeah, Bobby went into a lot of conversation about the New York Weekly Magazine and how the glamour and the style and how that really that's how Mary Mahoney learned to have the things she wanted in life, and she was obviously very glamorous.
She was.
What I read about your mother, though, is when she found a pair of shoes she liked, she bought every color.
Darn it, that's in my book too. How did you know all this?
That tells you about someone.
And we played with all those shoes. When they would go to the restaurant, we were dancing on the roof of our home on Kimball Drive in Gulfport, and with her shoes and her negligees and all her jewelry.
What a great setup. Gus Stevens was an interesting, one-of-a-kind place, and I hope you enjoy this look back. When we come back, though, I want to kind of start from the beginning.
Sure.
Your life growing up, and then it's intermingled in this whole story. So, especially the Jayne Mansfield situation,
Absolutely.
which you so clearly demonstrated. So, after this break, we'll be back with Elaine Stevens, and we'll continue our conversation looking back at Gus Stevens.
Excellent.
Listen live or on demand and watch episodes of Coast Vue on your laptop, desktop, or on your phone or tablet by going to supertalkmsgulfcoast.com.
Talking to the people that help make the coast such a unique place to live. This is Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast Vue. Like I said, we're taking a diversion for coronavirus. Everybody, I hope, is hunkered down and, keeping your social distancing going and taking care of your family and doing your homework and all of that. And, every now and then we got to kind of, get away from all that. We've got Elaine Stevens here, who has a terrific, incredible story to tell about her life growing up with her parents and Gus Stevens, this amazing, iconic restaurant that was on the coast until 1975. And what I want to do now, Elaine, is just kind of start from the beginning.
Right.
You were born at the CB base in Gulfport?
In Gulfport, yeah. Mother said, first of all, she had a hard time with me. Daddy wasn't there. She had to take a cab. Of course, he was at the restaurant. Mm-hmm. So I was born in Gulfport, Mississippi. And Mother, like I said, had a hard time. There was a Venetian blind that actually fell over the crib. So she always told me, maybe you weren't supposed to be here, because my life has been somewhat erratic since that moment in time.
My goodness. What was it like? I mean, you literally were thrust into, as a baby. I bet actually your first memory probably is Gus Stevens.
It is. And we thought Daddy owned all the restaurants, and when we'd go to a restaurant, we just assumed that it was his, because this part of our life was so integral to how we lived with other people and associated with other people, how we dressed, how we talked, what we ate. Mm-hmm. It influenced everything. And then we had the other thing at home, which was a very Greek traditional family, and then we had the restaurant and the nightclub. So it was quite a different kind of life growing up. I thought everybody had that kind of life.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit.
Okay.
Even before you got here. What were those influences on your dad that made him so entrepreneurial in this way?
I think that is a phenomenal question, Ricky. And as I've analyzed my dad through the years, he had this special quality. His family came from an island in Greece called Patmos Island. And it was where the book of Revelation was written by St. John. And my grandmother on his side, his mother, was a very religious and spiritual person. So he always gave credit to that other being around him. He was always praying. And he came through the coast. He had worked for restaurants through his lifetime in Houston and such as that, taking care of his mother. On his way from Alabama going back to Texas, he saw these beautiful flowers growing on the coast, and he was attracted to it, and he hooked up with his first gambler, Bob Thompson. Mm-hmm. And that's where the story began, because he ended up buying the first Gus Stevens from Bob Thompson. Really? Which is where the Beau Rivage is. It was a little diner, sort of a makeshift, kind of a shed-looking kind of place, And it was.
And what year was that?
Oh gosh, it was in the mid-40s. Mm-hmm. And so he bought that place, bought it for $5,000 that he carried with him on a cocktail napkin with a deal, with Bob Thompson. And after a night of heavy drinking, and they came back the next day, and Daddy said, cook me some breakfast. And he said, you stupid little Greek, you cook your own breakfast. You brought the joint last night. So that's exactly how it happened.
So he was thrust into this new career,
he was,
so to speak.
But he had this ability to be flexible and resilient. Like in Patmos, he would dive for sponges just to get an orange to go back and feed the family. So there was an element of scarcity and deprivation that surrounded him. That's why he was constantly on the move, constantly coming up with ideas and thinking how things could get better.
Wow. I've never been to Greece before, but my wife and I went to Croatia last year, and it's got to be a lot like that,
The people are similar. That's why we all mix here on the coast, the Yugoslavs and the Greeks.
So the island that he is from, is it near Crete?
It is not near Crete. It's a smaller island. It's called Patmos. And no, it's really not near, there's so many, there's hundreds of islands there. And the island is dotted with monasteries. So that was the predominant aura of the island itself. It was extremely religious and very, very spiritual.
So he is thrust into this new career in this sort of shanty place.
Yeah.
And how long did he stay there?
Well, the 1947 hurricane came along and took it away, so he ended up...
Were your parents, were they there during that time?
They were. Mother and Daddy married in 47. Mother swam out with the money bags over her head. Yeah. Daddy gave her a gun, and she went, a gun? I don't know anything about a gun. He goes, meet me at the Biloxi post office. I got to get more of the money out of here. So obviously business was even good then. But he rebuilt at the new location, which was Pat Harrison. At that time, now Veterans Boulevard. And he had many incarnations. He was constantly renovating, changing the menu, changing the motif. It was a barbecue joint, and a diner. And then eventually it just kept expanding. And I started working there when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
I filled salt and pepper shakers. I folded napkins. I got in the waitress's way. We would go back on the stage and play like we were part of the nightclub act.
So when did the stage become a big part of the...
Oh, my gosh. Dad started that in the 50s. Ronnie Cole tells a funny story. In the first incarnation of Gus Stevens, Ronnie Cole came through. He's a fabulous concert pianist. I don't know if you know Ronnie, but he's performed several times here on the coast. And he came through Gus Stevens with his then first family, and he said, Mr. Stevens, I kind of need some bucks here, to support this group here, my family. Can you give me a gig? And so Daddy said, sure. So the Ronnie Cole Trio was created, actually on the road. And so Daddy said to him, just go in the back and perform. He goes, well, Mr. Stevens, we kind of need a stage and maybe some lights. So he sent out his cousin, George Loizos, who had just come from Patmos to get the lights. The Ronnie Cole Trio set up on what I understand was then Coca-Cola cases. George brought the lights. They started playing, and the band noticed that they were sweating. And they were just perspiring under these lights. George had bought heat lamps instead of the regular theatrical lights that were required. So that's how it all started, with a very primitive concept.
So, but your dad pretty quickly understood that, wow, there's a great relationship between a successful restaurant or nightclub, however you want to look at it, and really good entertainment.
Well, the Greeks love to dance. They love music. They love good food. So it was sort of part of our heritage and part of our bloodline to be entertaining people. And so Daddy just took it on. And I can remember making calls to Atlanta, Georgia, to different agents in Atlanta. Ross Russell was an agent that Dad used to work with predominantly. And he would even consider booking people like the Supremes. I found pictures of the Supremes who never performed, but I have a dozen. That would
have been so
advanced.
Yes,
yeah, very much so. But Dad had performers that, there was one performer who dressed up like a gorilla, and it was Tonga and the gorilla, and it was such a real act that people were screaming, and they were known to run from the theater because part of the act was the gorilla would break the chain and run through the audience.
Oh, no.
The bathrooms were filled up after that.
He just had a knack for it.
He just knew it.
So I want to come back to the entertainment in a second, but food was always a big part of your family.
Definitely.
I read where you had at breakfast, you were thinking about lunch. And this is not at the restaurant. This is at home.
At home.
Your mother, did she have, I'm trying to remember, she had sauce or something that she bottled and sold, or what was it, some dressing or something?
Mother made her own salad dressing in her 80s.
Was it a Greek
It was a
salad
Greek salad dressing. It's shake what your yaya gave you, because yaya's Greek for a grandmother. So Mother and I started that long after Gus's had closed, and that was an endeavor she took on, and she said, your father would be so jealous right now.
Do you still have the recipe?
Of course I do. I make it at Christmas time
you'll
for
have to
people.
share it with me.
I'll bring you a bottle.
I love Greek salads.
I do too.
Yeah.
I make a good one.
I bet you do. I bet you do. So at what point, so he started kind of understanding there was this great relationship between entertainment and success.
Yes.
At what point did everyone realize, or you realize, my goodness, these are big names. How did he get these big names to want to come here? How did that work?
He had Andy Griffith. He had Jerry Van Dyke. He had Mamie Van Doren. He had Mel Torme used to sing to me. Dad just had a way, because it was a different circuit in those days. And it's a very beautiful area, as you know.
Yeah.
And it was the Mississippi Gulf Coast just coming into its own. The beaches and the water. And people loved it down here. So
I ran across,
to do that.
it's so funny. You just never know what you're going to run across. But I ran across a tourism promotional video that was done in 1966.
I want to see it.
Which is about that time.
Yeah.
And it's talking about sailing out the coast and the beaches and the wonderful environment and what you could do. Oh, golf, you could play golf, and I had this vision of being at the Paramount Theater as a kid and hearing this commercial, to be in a black and white commercial with this Hollywood voice saying, come to Mississippi. It's just really terrific, man. I mean,
we might need to run that again.
Yeah, that was the time. That was the time, though, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, Dad had that passion for the coast. That's why he got involved in the Coliseum. And there's a room that is dedicated to him at the Gulf Coast Coliseum. He was very, very passionate about beginning convention-type bookings down here and making sure that we became an area where people book their larger meetings and such as that. And that became very successful.
Well, even then, tourism was based on having amenities and having
Absolutely.
good restaurants and having places for people to be able to stay and taking advantage of the climate and the water and all those things.
All those things.
And Gus Stevens was kind of like the place to go.
Well, it was at the forefront, and he earned the name the father of coast entertainment, and he carried that on until the mid-'70s.
This is Elaine Stevens. We're having a little bit of a break from coronavirus today. We're focusing on looking back to a restaurant that closed in 1975. But if you talk to some of the elders on the coast and even some of the younger people who've had this story passed to them, Gus Stevens is really kind of in the memories of so many people here on coastal Mississippi. And hopefully by the time we get done talking today, you'll have an understanding of why. What just a fascinating story this is. And she's got a book. We'll talk more about the book as well in the next segment. We'll be back after this break.
Subscribe for free to the Coast Vue podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
He's the former president and publisher of the Sun Herald, and now he's on the radio. Welcome to Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast Vue. We're having a terrific conversation with Elaine Stevens, whose father and mother ran Gus Stevens Restaurant. Like I said, it closed in 1975, but it left such a mark here in coastal Mississippi, and it's part of our history. And it's great to look back at those times. And you're writing a book about it.
I am. And
so tell me a little bit more about the book. What made you decide to write the book to begin with?
Well, life takes many different turns, and I've been living in a dual reality of memory and now for some years. And as I look back on the Mansfield accident, which was a life-changing thing for me, because when my fiance died in that accident, I was pregnant. And in the Greek tradition of my life at that time, I was forced to give my daughter away. So I found this emotional transformation within me was something that other people might want to read about. and be a message to other women, because there are many women that went through that in that era and before and have since gone through it. And I have found my daughter, so there is also a second book that will be coming out. But the book is called Mermaid in the Window, and it's because we grew up in an era of female sexuality and sensuality with the burlesque dancers and people like Callantan and Skyrocket and Marta Dane and the school teacher, and Daddy would bring these girls over from New Orleans, and then I would learn from all of that. And the mermaid is sort of the sexual thread that runs through the book, and also the demure quality of woman. And then within the book itself, there is also this thread about freedom and the civil rights movement, which played a prominent role on our Mississippi Gulf Coast in the 60s, and a prominent role in my life, because I didn't have a civil rights worker working for me as a Greek girl. I was my own civil rights activist, so I was seeking my own sense of freedom. So there are a lot of multi-layers within the book, Ricky, and there's a lot of wonderful characters and people that we met along the way. People like Dave Gardner. Brother Dave, rejoice
I
dear
met
hearts.
him at the mall once.
Oh, my goodness.
And I called my dad. He was walking through and he used to tell all these great stories. My dad loved them. I called my dad on the phone and said, Dad, you got to come to the mall. Dave Gardner's here. And I got his autograph, and Dad did. He dropped everything and ran down. And by the time my dad got there, Dave Gardner had left.
He had left.
But I gave my dad the autograph that I had gotten, and he kept that with him for the rest of his life.
I kind of wish that were the only thing he left with me, is an autograph, because there were so many memories, good and bad.
Yeah.
And, because he was a controversial character, he was ahead of his time as well. I refer to him as the Lenny Bruce of the South. He did some things that were a little bit edgy.
He did.
He was extremely popular in his heyday. But what brought him down was drug and alcohol use. He used to smoke a joint on the stage at Dad's.
Wow.
Yeah.
Back when? That was in
the 60s.
Mid-60s? Isn't that interesting?
I know. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on. He dressed up in a Nazi uniform and danced on top of the roof of the restaurant with another musician.
Was that a drunken thing?
No. It was simply a statement.
Yeah.
Dave was like that. He helped me with my homework. He was brilliant, had a very high IQ. His children stayed with us. Our family became their family. And it was... I found it emotionally tumultuous for me as a young teenager to be in the midst of some of that, because their lifestyle was completely different. But I learned a great deal, and it makes for a great chapter in my book.
Even today, Elaine, if you look at the very best comics, even some of the best artists, their lives are kind of a wreck in a way.
They're tortured
in a way. And that's what makes them so creative.
That's right.
And most of them are incredibly smart.
Very smart.
Very, very smart. So you were around, while you were around some very tumultuous situations, you were around some incredibly artistic, smart people.
And that is exactly how my life evolved and revolves to this day. The creative part of my life is continuously growing and changing, and I have to attribute that to the Gus Stevens lifestyle that we had, because Daddy was bringing in comics and dancers and, quartets of all kinds, and beautiful people and not so beautiful people, and things that were evolving and changing. Jerry Lee Lewis, he had just married his 13-year-old cousin and was staying at the La Linda across when he performed at the restaurant, destroyed my piano. I was right at the age of the cousin, and I was terrified that he was going to take me on.
My
because
goodness.
I didn't know anything about that at the time, but people kept saying he's a sort of a terror, And,
but for good or for bad, you became worldly.
I did, at an early age, and yet very naive at the same time. It was a different kind of dichotomy, if you would.
Is that because your parents sort of, they knew you were in that environment, but they still wanted to protect you?
Definitely. But, there's a funny story in the book where Mother came home one afternoon, and my sister and I had created these little burlesque outfits and we were jumping up and down on the bed for the neighborhood boys. Because we were just simply, imitating what we saw at the restaurant, But you told us our bodies are heavenly and beautiful, Mom, but not in front of the neighborhood boys.
Oh, no. What a shocking moment that must be.
It was for all of us.
So as you think of the colorful characters that came through, you mentioned Dave, but I'm curious about who came through that touched your life so incredibly positively and you never forgot it?
Oh, goodness. That's a hard question. You know, I'd have to say Dave, you know, because when someone touches you, they touch you both good and bad. And the children touched us, you know, and we learned a lot about family and structure and the lack thereof. I think that some of the performers that came through, well, the Four Mints, they were a Greek quartet. They were beautiful. And then the Four Coins were the Greek quartet. And then the Four Mints were Gene Warren, his relatives and brothers. So those two groups kind of stayed with us. We had you know, as far as what influenced me, I'd say Callantan is another one. She was an early burlesque dancer. She went on to make movies with Howard Hughes. Sinbad the Sailor was one of them. I spoke with her recently.
Really?
She's 90-plus years old.
Wow.
She cried. I cried. She remembered the love that my parents shared between each other and how voluptuous my mother was. So, you know, women like that have come and gone, and all the memories of those characters have melded into this book. And it's amazing, you know, who we met and how we met them and what they did to us and for us.
So the book is very cathartic.
It is extremely cathartic.
And it's historical.
It is. And it starts in the late 50s and goes through 1967. And after the accident, there was a dramatic change in my life. The first line of the book is, when I was 18, I disappeared.
So you were 18 years old at
Yes.
that time.
Yes.
My goodness. I didn't know about that Greek custom.
Oh, my goodness.
Tell
Which
me more
one?
about that.
Which
well, the
one?
one about giving your child away.
Well, it had more to do with reputation and social mores. And so it was something that Dad and Mom made me feel somewhat ashamed of. So through the years, I had to deal with that. I was not consulted about it. You know, it was something that I was sort of instructed to do. And being the oldest in the family, I wanted to set a model for my brother and sister. So we ended up calling her, my daughter, the secret baby. So there's a whole wonderful, beautiful story about my journey through the adoption part of it and through the Salvation Army home in Tulsa. You know, what a complete difference in life from the glamour of the nightclub and the sheltered environment and all these beautiful people to the desolation of being
Why Tulsa? Just because it was...
Well, we had lawsuits, publicity, news people, lawyers. The Mansfield estate was countersuing everyone. Hargitay, there were many lawsuits. It went on for years into my first marriage.
Wow.
I was deposed in Chicago after my first marriage for that accident.
That's incredible.
So it went on for years. So Dad wanted to keep me away from that. I had to change my name when I went to Tulsa. I became someone else. And there again is a metaphor.
Wow, that's so interesting. What brought you to WLOX?
I was working with Dick Cavett in New York. And I came home because they went on hiatus. I didn't even know what the word hiatus meant. So I started.
We do today.
I certainly do.
We do today.
Yeah, we certainly do. So I came in and I kept interviewing with them. And at one point, I had sent a demo tape from WNET, which was the public television station. I had worked for Dick, and we did a demo tape. The guys, the union guys, took me upstairs and sort of secretly did a demo for me. And Scott Peterson then, Dale Robinson, his real name, said, "You're hired. Let's do it." And they gave me the Jackson County beat.
And the rest was history related to
I
WLOX.
loved it.
You had different roles there throughout your tenure.
I did.
How many years were you there?
It seemed like forever because I ended up marrying into the family. But my time there was a little less than 7 years, I believe.
Yeah, it seems much longer than that.
It seems much longer. We accomplished a lot because we created a beat in Jackson County and created a demographic there that they had not done before. So I was bringing in 8 stories a day from that county.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And a bad car. They didn't give me a decent car.
Well, Elaine, this is a terrific conversation. When we come back, I actually want to go back in time one more time and just hear a little bit more about the evolution of the acts and how all that played out. And you know, besides your book, what are you up to these days? We'll come back to that as well, because you've had so many iterations in your life, as most people have who've been on this show. So this is Elaine Stevens, and we're having just a fun look back at Gus Stevens. And especially had this conversation about her cathartic book, The Mermaid in the Window, which is also a historical perspective. It sounds like it's going to have some funny parts and some really sad parts. So, but anyway, we'll be back after this break.
Listen live or on demand and watch episodes of Coast Vue on your laptop, desktop, or on your phone or tablet by going to supertalkmsgulfcoast.com.
Talking to the people that help make the coast such a unique place to live. This is Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast Vue. I have Elaine Stevens here, and we're looking back at her life and Gus Stevens' restaurant and her parents and so many interesting stories. Your dad knew Carlos Marcellus. Well, first of all, for people who don't know who that is, tell them who it is and what was their relationship.
Carlos was, for want of a better word, a very prominent mobster figure that allegedly played a role in the Kennedy assassination. Yeah. And as I did my research, he had extensive holdings throughout the country and in the Caribbean. He was quite well-to-do. He died a peaceful death at his home, so the feds really couldn't get him on anything, as big as he was. But Daddy and he literally saw eye to eye. They were about the same height. They both had accents. Carlos obviously was Italian. Daddy was Greek. They were a year apart in ages. They loved to dress really flashy. They smelled really good. They wore, little flashy cufflinks and everything. But they had this one thing that really brought them together, and that was the belief that liquor, gambling, hot woman, and some good food was a way to make money. And that was the beginning of their relationship.
He came here to eat and enjoy the entertainment.
Well, he heard about Dad. He had offered him, there's a story in the book about how he offered Dad several different opportunities. And of course, my mother said, I will take the children and leave you. If you do that, it will not happen. Yeah. So Court of Two Sisters was one of the opportunities that he offered Dad.
Wow.
And then he wanted him to have a casino in the early days before it was even legalized.
I'll be darned.
So there were some different options. What happened was they continued dealing with the liquor industry and some entertainment because Carlos had some holdings in the quarter.
Wow.
So they weren't as close as Daddy could have wanted to be.
Yeah, thank goodness.
He said, as Daddy put it, he said it was the black market in those days with Carlos. It wasn't exactly legal. It was just a little crooked.
Wow. Hey, listen, I'm actually curious. We don't have time to go through all of them, but I am curious. When one of these acts arrived, is there one that really sticks out in your mind that says, man, this is a traveling road show. This is a big stage show. This is going to be amazing, and it was amazing. Who sticks out like that?
Andy Griffith.
Really?
And Jerry Van Dyke.
They both did.
They both did.
And
because,
why?
Well, they became close friends of ours, and we sort of followed them, and they were with us. They took pictures with us, with the family. They were there on holidays. We took them to the farm. We were on the boat together. They just became part of our lives. And then Johnny Rivers also was a third one because he went into business with Dad, into a motel in Pass Christian.
Oh, really?
And my then fiance, who was in the Mansfield car, but we were together, he and Johnny Rivers became very, very close.
Wow.
And Johnny gave Ronnie a guitar. So those three men, I think, were very influential in how we dealt with people that went on to really become something.
So your dad didn't think that Elvis's pelvis movement was appropriate for his stage, but did you meet him?
No, I did not meet him. I did not meet him. He and Mama took pictures together with him.
Yeah, so I mean, a great history here in coastal Mississippi.
I mean,
wow.
He was dating June Juanico at the time.
Of course, yeah. It was wonderful. I mean, wonderful pictures of them together.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears because we're kind of beginning to wind down. I'm just curious, besides writing a book, what are you up to these days?
Well, I do voiceovers and I do some commercials. I did 3 wonderful commercials for Island View. Thank you, Rick Carter, for giving me that opportunity.
Yeah.
I work very well with a production company called Take Two. I consult on a couple of different local shows, Jerica's Fashion Showcase, and then my friend who does Miss Congeniality. She's just getting back from Russia. That's Jamie Doris. So I still have my hands in the mix. But my predominant desire now, aside from reading, which I'm passionate about, is writing. And I'm starting my second book called Finding Angela.
The story of your daughter.
The story of my daughter.
Yeah.
So I write articles for different magazines when they call me. I just do what I kind of want to do, Ricky.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, you've earned the opportunity to be able to do that.
Occasionally, I'll do a voiceover for MPB. I did the voice for Katrina, the 10-year anniversary. So they'll call me about things like that.
So you still travel about, and like, how many times a week do people mention Gus Stevens to you?
Oh my gosh. Through email and Facebook and on the phone, and people that have worked with us, and and then I'll get phone calls. I used to work for your dad. I would say just about every day.
Isn't that something? It
really is.
And you brought me.
I did.
I'll show the video audience. I have my own menu now from Gus Stevens, and you said there's an appetizer in here for 80 cents, you said?
There's a bunch of things. I think there's a cocktail for 60 cents.
I want a menu like the seafood platter, $2.95.
How about that steak?
Yeah.
How about that $2.50 steak?
And then a New Zealand jumbo platter. Lobster, excuse me, for $4.95. I want that.
Hey, and you know what we used to do?
So I want lobster and the Greek sauce.
I'll bring it to you. We used to call the restaurant, watching black and white movies, sitting in bed with Mama, call the restaurant, order club steak, lobster thermidor, whatever. They'd bring it to us in a cardboard box.
We're winding down real quick. Just list them off. Where did your mama buy her shoes?
Oh, Northrop's, downtown Gulfport. Every pair, every color she could find.
That's so funny. People from those days will remember that so well.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure, Elaine.
Oh,
thank
Ricky,
you so much.
Thank you for doing the show.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's just, I'm creating this digital history book. And today was a fun diversion away from the coronavirus situation. And it will pass. We're resilient people, and we know how to weather storms, and hopefully people are remaining safe, and hopefully people are practicing social distancing in the purest of form, and they're doing their education to keep their families safe.
May I add something here?
Yes.
I want to say that Ricky Mathews has provided us not only a daily tribute to our Gulf Coast, but an allowance of our memories and an ability to tell our stories that no one has ever really given us on a consistent basis.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I appreciate that. Have a great day.
You can also listen live to SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1 on your Amazon Alexa devices. Once you've enabled the skill, just say, Alexa, open SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast.